Every weapon on earth traces back to one line in the 8th chapter of the Book of Enoch. The scribes named the teacher, and he was not human. The Book of Enoch was removed from the Bible by the Council of Laodicea in the year 364. It was banned, hidden, and called dangerous by the church. But at Qumran in 1947, 11 copies of Enoch surfaced, and Azazel is named in the oldest of them. Chapter 8 names 4 crafts of war and the watcher who handed them down. You will see what he taught, how heaven bound him, and why the fingerprint is still visible today. If forbidden biblical history fascinates you, hit subscribe. Every week, we uncover another name the church tried to bury. If you open Genesis 6, all you get is this. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair. They took them wives. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards. There are 4 verses in the Hebrew, and the scribe moves straight onto the flood. Genesis names no watcher. Genesis assigns no craft. Genesis gives you the marriage and the giants and nothing else. And the story of what these beings taught mankind, if anything, is left out of the record entirely. Then Leviticus chapter 16 names Azazel outright, but the way Leviticus names him is stranger than a scholar can comfortably explain. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest casts lots over 2 goats. One is for the Lord. One in the Hebrew is La Azazel for Azazel. The Bible describes the ritual in careful detail, prescribes where the goat is to be led, and never once explains who Azazel is, or why he is receiving a share of the annual atonement. Then Jude, in the New Testament, quotes the Book of Enoch by name and by chapter in a letter that became scripture in every Christian Bible printed. But the Book of Enoch he quotes was not printed alongside it. The letter traveled. The source did not. The older Jewish tradition was not nearly so restrained. Where the canonical text hints, the older tradition names, enlists, and describes. And it is the older tradition we are here for tonight. The list survived, but only because someone took it the long way round. 2 long ways round, actually. In 1952, 5 years after the first Dead Sea Scrolls came out of the cliffs above the Wadi Qumran, Bedouin of the Ta'amiri tribe found the cave that scholars label Cave 4. It sits within sight of the ruined settlement of Qumran, above the Dead Sea shore. The cave held the wreckage of a library. There were roughly 15,000 fragments from more than 500 manuscripts. Among them were 11 fragmentary manuscripts of the Book of Enoch in its original Aramaic. Paleographers date the oldest copy, cataloged as Fragment 4 Q201, to somewhere around 200 years before Christ. It is older than Christianity and older than almost every surviving manuscript of the Hebrew Bible. And on those fragments, the muster roll of the Watchers appears, with our Watcher named among them. The Aramaic gives his name as Asael. The Geza later renders it Azazel. Scholars have long since identified the two as the same figure. The man who eventually reassembled the fragments was a Polish priest named Joseph Mielik, who had been part of the original Qumran team. His book, The Books of Enoch, Aramaic Fragments of Qumran Cave 4, was published by Oxford's Clarendon Press in 1976. It remains the foundation of the field. But that is only one of the 2 long ways round. In 1773, more than 150 years earlier, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce was returning from Gondar in the Ethiopian highlands, where he had spent years trying to trace the source of the Blue Nile. He brought back 3 copies of the complete Book of Enoch in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopian Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church had never stopped reading it. The Western churches had simply forgotten. Bruce deposited a copy at the Bodleian Library at Oxford, where it sat largely ignored for nearly 50 years. In 1821, an Oxford professor named Richard Lawrence finally translated it into English. In 1912, an English scholar named Robert Henry Charles produced the Standard Critical Edition, published by Oxford University Press. He worked from the Geza and the Greek, and, where available, the Aramaic simultaneously. When I quote from 1st Enoch in this episode, I am quoting from Charles. Somewhere between the sealed pot in the Judean cliffs, in the Highland Chapel in Ethiopia, the same sentence survived. The teacher was punished, the craft was not. So here is what the text says. 1 Enoch chapter 8 verse 1 in the rendering by Charles. And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth, in the art of working them, in bracelets, in ornaments, in the use of antimony, in the beautifying of the eyelids, in all kinds of costly stones, in all coloring tinctures. That is a single verse, one sentence on a leather scroll 2,000 years old. There are 2 clauses of war, 1 clause of industry, and 3 clauses of adornment. All are laid at the feet of one watcher, in the order the scribe chose to write them. Then, 2 chapters later, the same book returns to Azazel with the verdict of heaven. 1 Enoch, chapter 10, verses 4 through 6. And again the Lord said to Raphael, Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudael, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light. And on the day of the great judgment he shall be cast into the fire. That is chapter 10, verses 4 through 6. Exactly as Charles rendered them in 1912, cross-checked in Malick's Aramaic reconstruction, where the name in the older manuscript reads Asael. Charles took his wording from the Ge'ez. Malick confirmed the same sentence in an older hand from a fragment in K4 that predates the Roman conquest of Judea. 2 independent lines of transmission carry the same verdict. Now look at what the list actually is, because the order matters. The scribe of chapter 8 is not a careless scribe. He is a careful one, and what he puts first is what he wants you to notice first. The list opens with 4 items: a sword, a knife, a shield, and a breastplate. 2 of those are offensive weapons and 2 are defensive. That is not a hunter's kit, and it is not a shepherd's kit. That is the standard 4-piece inventory of an ancient soldier, and it is the earliest surviving catalog of any army's basic issue that has come down to us. The scribe of Enoch, writing in the 3rd or 2nd century before Christ, is describing the tools of war in the sequence in which any subsequent quartermaster would list them. Someone knew what they were talking about. The next clause widens the aperture. Azazel made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them. He taught more than weapons. He taught the industrial base behind the weapons. He taught the extraction, the smelting, the alloying, and the forging. He taught everything a civilization needs to move from bronze into iron and eventually into steel. In one clause, the scribe compresses the entire history of what modern universities would later call metallurgy into 8 words. Then something strange happens. The same sentence, without a pause, pivots to bracelets, ornaments, antimony, the beautifying of the eyelids, costly stones, and coloring tinctures. It runs from the sword to the eye paint, from the forge to the cosmetics counter. In a modern reading, it feels like 2 verses ineptly stitched together. In the ancient reading, it is a single thought. There are 2 possibilities. Either the scribe made a mistake, and someone in the copying chain smashed together what were once 2 separate teachings, or the scribe meant it. And the more you sit with the chapter, the more it feels like the second. The forge produces the sword. The forge also produces the mirror, and the bracelet, and the fine powder for the eyelids. The same craftsman makes both. The same industry supplies both. Aggression and vanity, in the theology of chapter 8, are the two faces of a single lesson about matter and what men do with it once they know how to work it. The other named Watchers in Chapter 8 get shorter lists. Geza taught enchantments and root cuttings. Armoros taught the resolving of enchantments. Barakijel taught astrology. Kokabel taught the constellations. Ezekiel taught the knowledge of the clouds. Arakiel taught the signs of the earth. Shamsiel taught the signs of the sun. Sariel taught the course of the moon. 8 Watchers received 8 short assignments, all falling into 2 neat categories: the magical arts and the sciences of heaven. Azazel gets a list twice as long as any of the others. Azazel is the only one whose teaching spans both the men's fall and the women's fall in the same breath. Azazel is the only teacher in the entire muster roll whose subject is what we would recognize today as civilization. The tools of aggression sit on one side of his lesson. The tools of vanity sit on the other. One Watcher taught it all as a single syllabus. You start to sense what the ancient reader would have felt. The teacher would be punished. The craft apparently would not. And then the consequences arrived. Chapter 9 of 1st Enoch opens on the 4 archangels looking down from heaven, Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and Gabriel, and seeing what the earth has become. Charles renders it in the archaic register the scribes reach for at moments like this: much blood being shed upon the earth, all lawlessness being wrought upon the earth. The archangels bring the case before the Most High. The verdict comes back with names attached. Each archangel gets a specific assignment. Uriel is sent to Noah to warn him. Michael is sent to Semjaza, the ringleader, to bind him and his associates under the hills for 70 generations. Gabriel is sent against the giants, the offspring of the Watchers, to set them one against another that they may destroy each other in battle. And Raphael is sent to Azazel. The instructions to Raphael are extraordinarily specific for an ancient text. Here is the translation by Charles from chapter 10, verses 4 and following. Bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness. Make an opening in the desert, which is in Dudal, and cast him therein. Place upon him rough and jagged rocks, and cover him with darkness, and let him abide there forever, and cover his face that he may not see light. And on the day of the great judgment, he shall be cast into the fire. Nobody knows where Dudal is. The Hebrew place name may be built from the roots for cauldron and God. Rabbinic tradition places it east of Jerusalem, in the wilderness of the scapegoat. The Ethiopic keeps the name untranslated. No archaeologist has ever identified the site. The prison, if it is a prison, is off the map. Then, in verse 8, the verdict lands as a general statement. The whole earth has been corrupted through the works that were taught by Azazel. To him ascribe all sin. That last clause, in the original, is a legal formula. It is the ancient equivalent of the writ that hangs the blame around one convict's neck. Anyone who has read the Greek poets recognizes the shape of this: a teacher chained in a rocky wilderness, sentenced by a supreme deity for handing men a forbidden craft. Nickelsburg, in his 2001 commentary, notes the parallel with the Prometheus tradition openly. He does not claim direct borrowing. He notes that both cultures, on different sides of the Eastern Mediterranean, wrote the same story about the same kind of transgression at roughly the same time. The teacher had been bound. The craft went on. Where did it go? Look at 3 concentric circles, tightening. The outer circle is the weapon list itself. Sword, knife, shield, and breastplate are the 4 items. Open any museum catalog of Bronze Age or Iron Age military equipment, and those 4 categories are the 4 you will see. The Assyrian reliefs at Nineveh show them. The Hittite metalwork of Anatolia shows them. The Egyptian grave goods of the New Kingdom show them. The Greek hoplite panoply is built on them. The Roman legionary kit is built on them. Every ancient army west of the Indus organized itself around some version of that 4-item list. and every modern army is a lineal descendant of those. Change the metallurgy, but keep the four functions. The sword becomes the rifle, the knife becomes the bayonet, the shield becomes the ballistic plate, the breastplate becomes body armor. The catalog that Enoch chapter 8 assigns to Azazel is the same catalog every arms manufacturer on Earth still ships under 4,000 years later. The middle circle is the industrial curriculum, the metals of the earth, and the art of working them. Second Temple Jewish tradition, as Nickelsburg and others have noted, drew a straight line from Azazel to Tubal-Cain, the figure named in Genesis chapter 4, verse 22, as the forger of every cutting instrument of brass and iron. Genesis names Tubal-Cain and drops him after one line. Enoch supplies the theological prehistory behind the line. The first metalworker in the Bible had a teacher, and the teacher was not human. The rabbinic writers do not always endorse the identification, but they preserve it. The chain from an angelic instructor to the first name Smith runs through Enoch chapter 8. The inner circle is the fingerprint that never came off the periodic table. Look at chapter 8, verse 1 again. Azazel taught the use of antimony. Antimony still sits at element 51 on every chemistry classroom's periodic table under the symbol Sb. For stibium, the Latin name for the same powdered mineral, the ancient Egyptians and later the Arabs used as eye cosmetic. The Arabic name for that cosmetic was al-Kul. Medieval European alchemists borrowed the Arabic word as a general term for any highly refined essence, then narrowed it to the volatile spirit distilled from wine. The modern English word alcohol, printed on every bottle in every liquor store on earth, is a direct etymological descendant of the powder Azazel, is credited with teaching in Enoch chapter 8. Tertullian, the Carthaginian theologian, wrote a treatise around the year 202 called On the Apparel of Women. He cited this exact passage of Enoch as scripture in an argument that Christian women should not wear cosmetics because the practice had been taught to mankind by fallen angels. He was working from the Greek text of Enoch, more than 1100 years before Bruce brought the Ge'ez copies out of Ethiopia. The tradition never died. It was only, for a while, mislaid. Every ingot of steel ever cast, every element still cataloged as SB, and every bottle still labeled alcohol says the same sentence out loud. The teacher took the fall. The craft never did. The fingerprint held for more than 2,000 years. The lesson has never been unlearned. In my reading, chapter 8 of 1 Enoch is not really a list of crimes. It is a theory of civilization, and it is possibly the bleakest one ever written. Civilization, in this reading, is not a triumph of human ingenuity. It is a leak of forbidden knowledge from a class of beings who were never meant to hand it down, through one watcher whose curriculum somehow spans everything men do to each other in war, and everything men and women do to themselves in vanity. The chapter is not accusing the students, it is accusing the teacher. The whole book turns on that. And yet one sentence in the judgment still refuses, at least for me, to sit straight. It is the verdict in chapter 10, verse 8. To him ascribe all sin. Because Azazel, when you go back to chapter 6, is not the leader of the rebellion. Semjaza is. Semjaza is the first watcher named in the muster roll. Semjaza is the one who feared to descend alone. Semjaza is the one who wrote the mutual imprecation oath, so no other watcher could back out without every other watcher going down with him. Semjaza organized the crime. Azazel taught the curriculum after they arrived. Yet when heaven grades the case and assigns the sentence, every share of the blame lands on the craftsman. It does not land on the ringleader. The scribe seems to have believed, or the tradition behind him seems to have believed, that the man who teaches the craft is guiltier than the man who plans the descent. That is a theology of technology as much as it is a theology of sin. I have not made up my mind about that choice. I am not sure I agree with it. I am also not sure I disagree. In my reading, the whole book turns on that asymmetry. The teacher was punished. The craft was never. Which brings us to the question underneath this whole episode. If the teacher took the fall, who actually gave the order? Next time we climb the mountain. Geza is the Watcher, named first in Enoch chapter 6. He is the one who gathered the 200 on the slopes of Mount Hermon. He is the one who wrote the oath that bound every Watcher to descend together, so that none of them could return alone. Geza organized the crime that Azazel took the fall for. In the story of what he said on that mountain, to make 199 other Watchers sign, is the one we walk through next. Before you go, one question. Of the 4 items in Azazel's opening list, the sword, the knife, the shield, and the breastplate, which one do you think has changed the world the most, and which one has changed the least? I read every answer in the comments, and this question in particular, I want to see how you land. If you enjoyed this one, give it a like. It genuinely helps the channel, and subscribing means you will not miss the next one. See you then.